The knife slashed through my wedding photos, my face torn away like I never existed. Rebecca sat on my living room floor in my Vera Wang dress, her hands steady as she destroyed my life one portrait at a time. My spare key didn't work. She'd changed the locks weeks ago. Now I'm bleeding, locked out of my own home, and my boss just got an email saying I quit. An email I never sent. The woman who was supposed to be my friend. She's already wearing my future, and she's not done yet. The smell of stale lilies and metallic sweat hung heavy in the hallway. Sarah Miller dropped her keys. They landed on the hardwood with a muffled clatter. But the woman upstairs didn't flinch. Avoiding the creaky third step, Sarah climbed toward the master suite. The rhythmic snip, snip, snip of steel blades sliced through the silence of the afternoon. In the center of the room, Rebecca Thorne stood draped in ivory silk. The train of Sarah's wedding dress pooled around Rebecca's ankles like curdled milk. She had forced the zipper, the delicate lace straining against her broader shoulders. Rebecca held a heavy pair of kitchen shears in one hand and a silver-framed portrait of the Miller family in the other. Sarah froze at the threshold, her breath hitching in a throat that suddenly felt lined with sandpaper. This was the dress Sarah had worn to promise her life to David. A garment she had preserved in acid-free tissue, now stretched and distorted over the frame of a woman she had called a friend. With a slow, deliberate twist of her wrist, Rebecca drove the tip of the blades into Sarah's forehead on the glass. The photo groaned, a sharp, splintering protest. Rebecca carved a jagged circle around Sarah's eyes, her tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth in focused concentration. A flurry of glossy paper scraps drifted to the rug. Sarah's face, severed into a dozen confetti-sized pieces, lay scattered near Rebecca's heels. Rebecca stepped on a fragment of Sarah's smile, grinding it into the pile with her toe. She lifted the frame, held the hollowed-out hole over her own face, and tilted her head. The seamstress mentioned it ran small. Rebecca whispered, her voice a dry rasp that didn't turn around. She lied. It fits like a second skin. Much better balance now, don't you think? Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, like a trapped bird. The sight of her own hollowed-out image in Rebecca's hands sent a jolt of primal adrenaline through her limbs. She didn't think. She lunged. Her fingers, usually so precise and controlled, clawed at the ivory silk, trying to tear the intruder out of her history. "Get out!" Sarah shrieked, the sound raw and ugly in the sterile air of the bedroom. "Get out of my dress! Get out of my house!" Rebecca didn't flee. She turned with a serpent's grace, the heavy shears replaced in a heartbeat by a slender, silver ex-acto knife she must have had tucked in the lace. The blade caught the afternoon sun, a wicked spark of light. As Sarah reached for her, Rebecca slashed downward. The steel bit into Sarah's forearm, a cold, clinical sting that was followed a second later by the hot, pulsing rush of blood. Sarah gasped, stumbling back, her heels catching on the thick pile of the rug. The struggle moved into the hallway, a chaotic dance of silk and violence. Rebecca fought with a feral, unexpected strength, her eyes wide and unblinking, mirroring Sarah's own terror but reflecting it back as something predatory. Sarah's shoulders slammed into the wall, knocking a landscape painting askew. She tried to grab Rebecca's wrist, but the other woman was slick, fueled by a manic energy that Sarah couldn't match. With a guttural grunt, Rebecca lunged forward, shoving Sarah hard. Sarah's heels left the floor. She flew backward, the world tilting until her spine collided with the heavy marble console table in the foyer. The impact was a dull thud that vibrated through her skull, leaving her vision swimming in a sea of gray static. Sarah slumped to the floor, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gulps. The marble was cold against her neck, a stark contrast to the burning ache in her head. She watched, dazed, as Rebecca stood over her for a moment, adjusting the strap of the wedding dress with a casual, terrifying calm. Rebecca didn't finish the job. Instead, she turned and walked toward the stairs, the silk train hissing against the wood like a snake in the grass. Pain radiated from Sarah's arm, a rhythmic throb that demanded attention. She forced herself to crawl, her knees scraping the hardwood, until she reached the kitchen. She slammed the door shut and engaged the heavy brass bolt. The click of the lock felt like a temporary reprieve, a small victory in a world that had gone sideways. She leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator, the hum of the motor the only sound in the room. She needed help. She needed David. Her fingers trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket, the screen smeared with a drop of her own blood. There were no missed calls from her husband, but a notification for a new voicemail sat at the top of the list. It was from James Wilson, her boss. Sarah pressed the phone to her ear, her pulse drumming in her temple. "Sarah." James's voice was clipped, punctuated by the sharp click of his silver stopwatch. "I've received your resignation email. I must say the timing is less than optimal given the quarterly projections, but I've processed the paperwork. We've already revoked your system permissions to maintain security. Total time for offboarding, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Good luck with your personal endeavors." The phone slipped from Sarah's hand, clattering onto the marble island. A resignation email? She hadn't sent anything. She hadn't even opened her laptop since the night before. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Rebecca hadn't just broken into her house. She had been inside her life. She had been sitting at Sarah's desk, using Sarah's words, erasing Sarah's future while Sarah was out picking up dry cleaning. Subverted beat 1.4. Sarah's first instinct was flight. The kitchen felt like a cage, the sharp scent of bleach and scorched dust suddenly suffocating. She had to get to her car, find a police station, find David at his office, anywhere but here. She scrambled toward the front door, her mind racing with a logical plan. She would run to the neighbor's house, the Johnsons, and call 911 from a landline. They knew her. They would see the blood on her arm and the terror in her eyes. It was the smartest move. Remove herself from the immediate danger and bring in the authorities. She reached the heavy oak front door and gripped the handle. It turned, but the door stayed seated in the frame. She frowned, her fingers searching for the deadbolt thumb turn. She found it, but it felt wrong. Too smooth, the metal too cold. She twisted it, expecting the familiar, heavy thunk of the bolt sliding back. Instead, there was a hollow, mechanical whir. The door didn't budge. Sarah's breath hitched. She looked closer at the hardware. This wasn't her lock. The aged bronze fixture she had picked out with David had been replaced by a sleek, brushed steel smart lock. She hadn't installed this. David hadn't mentioned it. She pulled at the door again, throwing her weight against it. But the frame was solid, reinforced. She remembered then, 3 weeks ago, when she and David had gone to Martha's vineyard, she had given Rebecca her spare key to water the plants and check the mail. Rebecca had been a godsend, a true friend. Sarah had felt a surge of gratitude when Rebecca offered. Now she realized the truth. Rebecca hadn't just used the key to enter. She had used the time to bring in a contractor. She had replaced the heart of the house's security. Sarah lunged for the side window. But as she pulled back the curtain, she saw the same sleek steel sensors mounted on the glass. A small red light blinked at her, a mechanical eye watching her panic. She wasn't just locked out of her life. She was locked inside a trap of her own making. The very house she had spent years turning into a sanctuary had been converted into a prison, and the keys were in the hands of the woman wearing her wedding dress upstairs. Sarah sank to the floor, the realization chilling her more than the blood loss. She wasn't the homeowner anymore. In the eyes of the digital world and the physical locks of this building, she was the intruder. The silence of the house was suddenly broken by a sharp, rhythmic pop, 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 pop. It was the sound of knuckles cracking in a precise sequence. Rebecca was nearby. The shadows in the foyer seemed to lengthen and bleed together as the sun dipped behind the Connecticut tree line. Sarah stayed huddled by the door, her ears straining for the sound of footsteps. But the house remained eerily still. Then, with a suddenness that made her heart leap into her throat, the lights died. Not just the overhead chandelier, but the small green glow of the microwave clock, the under-cabinet LEDs, even the streetlights outside. The neighborhood was plunged into a thick, velvety darkness. Sarah reached for her phone, hoping to use the flashlight. But as she pressed the button, the screen remained black. She held it up, searching for a signal bar, but the top corner of the display showed a small, pulsing icon she didn't recognize. The air felt heavy, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made the hair on her arms stand up. It was a signal jammer. She had read about them in security briefings at work, devices that flooded the air with noise, drowning out cellular signals and Wi-Fi. Rebecca had cut the cord. Sarah was now invisible to the world. She began to navigate the kitchen by touch, her fingers trailing along the cold marble of the island. Her foot caught on something soft, and she stumbled, her hands landing in a pile of leather and fabric. She reached down, her fingers tracing the familiar shape of a heel, a buckle, a silk lining. These were her shoes, her Prada pumps, her favorite leather boots, the sneakers she wore for morning jogs. They had been dumped into a trash bag and left in the middle of the floor like refuse. As she moved toward the counter, her hand brushed against a stack of paper. She felt the texture, heavy, high-quality bond. She found a small pen light in the junk drawer and clicked it on, shielding the beam with her palm. The light revealed a notebook. Page after page was covered in her own name. Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller. The handwriting was a perfect match. The way she looped her S, the specific slant of the M, the tiny dot she always placed slightly to the right of the I. It was a masterpiece of forgery. Rebecca hadn't just been practicing. She had been obsessing. There were hundreds of pages, a mountain of evidence that Rebecca had spent months, perhaps years, studying the very rhythm of Sarah's hand. A sudden floorboard creak from behind her made Sarah whirl around. The beam of the pen light cut through the darkness, landing on the pantry door. It swung open with a slow, agonizing groan. A shadow loomed there, far too large to be Rebecca. "Don't move," a deep, gravelly voice commanded. A man stepped into the kitchen. He was dressed in heavy canvas work clothes, a tool belt jingling at his waist. In the dim light, Sarah could see the glint of a heavy wrench in his hand. "Who are you?" Sarah gasped, backing away until her spine hit the stove. "What are you doing in my house?" "Your house?" The man took a step forward, his face set in a mask of righteous anger. "The owner called me. Said a squatter had been breaking in, trashing the place. She said you were dangerous." "I'm Sarah Miller. I live here." "That's not what the paperwork says," the man countered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, tossing it onto the island. "I'm a licensed locksmith, lady. I don't take sides. I just follow the work order. And the woman who hired me, the one upstairs, She had the ID to prove who she is. He lunged then, his large hands reaching for Sarah's shoulders. He wasn't trying to hurt her, not exactly. He was trying to detain her, to hold the squatter, until the police arrived. But to Sarah, he was just another part of the nightmare. She felt his fingers dig into her coat, the smell of grease and tobacco filling her senses. "Let go of me!" She reached behind her, her hand closing around the handle of the heavy cast-iron skillet she had left on the burner that morning. With a desperate two-handed swing, she brought the pan around. It connected with the man's forearm with a sickening clack. He roared in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to twist away. She didn't wait to see if he would follow. She bolted toward the stairs, her breath coming in jagged horizontal lines. She scrambled up the steps, her feet heavy as lead, her mind a blur of panic and betrayal. She reached the master's suite and slammed the door, shoving the heavy vanity chair against the handle. She needed her passport. She needed her birth certificate. If the world didn't believe who she was, she needed the physical proof. She ran to the walk-in closet and yanked open the doors. The silence that met her was more terrifying than the locksmith's shout. David's side of the closet was a hollow cavern. His suits, his sweaters, his rows of polished Oxfords, all gone. Only the empty wooden hangers remained, clinking together in the draft from the HVAC vent like skeletal wind chimes. Sarah fell to her knees, her hands grasping at the empty air where David's life used to hang. He hadn't just left for the day. He had cleared out. Rebecca hadn't just sent him to a hotel. She had convinced him to move. She crawled toward the nightstand, her fingers searching the dark until they found her old iPad, tucked deep under the bed frame where she'd dropped it months ago. She powered it on, the screen's blue light blinding in the black room. It was an old model, one Rebecca must have overlooked. It still had the saved login for their shared messaging account. The screen populated with a string of messages between Sarah and David. "David, I can't do this anymore." One message read, dated 2 days ago. "The house feels like a tomb. I found that apartment in the city. It's a fresh start. Move your things today while I'm at the conference. I'll meet you there on Friday. Don't call. I need space to breathe." Asterisk. David's replies were heartbreakingly compliant. "I don't understand, but I'll do whatever you need to be happy. I've moved the big stuff. I'm at the hotel until the lease starts. I love you, Sarah." Sarah gripped the iPad so hard the glass groaned. Rebecca had used David's own fear of conflict against him. She had painted a picture of a crumbling marriage and a secret move, and he had followed the path of least resistance right out of his own life. The landline on the bedside table let out a shrill, piercing ring. Sarah jumped, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. She hesitated, then snatched the receiver. "Hello," she whispered. "Mrs. Miller?" A professional, feminine voice asked. "This is Cynthia from First National. I'm calling to confirm the wire transfer you initiated this afternoon. The $500,000 to the offshore account in the Caymans has been flagged for a secondary verification. I didn't—" Sarah started, but her voice failed her. "The caller provided your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and the verbal passkey, Lily's. Is this correct?" Lily's. The smell in the hallway. Rebecca had even stolen Sarah's favorite flower to use as a weapon. "No," Sarah managed to choke out. "Stop the transfer. It's not me. Someone is—" The line went dead. Not a hang-up, but a sharp electronic snap. The signal jammer was working on the landline now, too. Sarah dropped the receiver. She was broke. She was homeless. She was husbandless. A sudden crash from the bedroom door made her scream. The vanity chair was shoved aside as if it were made of balsa wood. Rebecca stood in the doorway, the wedding dress now stained with Sarah's blood and the locksmith's grease. She wasn't holding the X-Acto knife anymore. She was holding Sarah's Marketer of the Year award, a heavy, jagged block of solid glass. "You always were so proud of this," Rebecca said, her voice a low, melodic hum. "The weight of success, the clarity of vision." She lunged. The glass block descended like a guillotine. Sarah threw her arms up, the impact shattering the bone in her left wrist with a sound like a dry branch snapping. She fell to the floor, the world spinning. Rebecca was on top of her in an instant, the weight of the silk dress smothering Sarah's face. "You don't deserve any of it," Rebecca hissed, her face inches from Sarah's. "You count your compliments in a notebook like they're coins. You don't live your life, Sarah. You just archive it. I'm going to actually use it." Sarah clawed at Rebecca's eyes, her good hand finding purchase on the other woman's neck. They rolled across the floor, a tangle of limbs and ivory fabric. Sarah felt a surge of cold, hard fury. This woman wasn't just stealing her house. She was stealing her soul. With a burst of strength she didn't know she possessed, Sarah shoved her thumb into the soft tissue of Rebecca's throat. Rebecca gagged, her grip on the glass award faltering. Sarah scrambled on top, pinning Rebecca's arms down with her knees. "I am Sarah Miller," Sarah gasped, her voice thick with blood and tears. "And you are nothing." The bedroom door burst open. The blinding beam of a high-powered tactical flashlight cut through the room, catching Sarah in its glare. "Police! Drop the weapon! Hands in the air!" Subverted beat 3.6. Relief flooded through Sarah, so potent she almost fainted. The police were here. The locksmith must have called them, or perhaps a neighbor saw the lights go out. She didn't move her hands from Rebecca's wrists, terrified that the woman would vanish if she let go. "Thank God," Sarah sobbed, looking toward the light. "She's the one. She's the intruder. She's wearing my dress. I said hands in the air," the officer shouted, his voice booming in the small space. Sarah slowly lifted her hands, her broken wrist hanging at a sickening angle. She looked down at Rebecca, expecting to see the face of a defeated monster. Instead, Rebecca's face had transformed. The predatory sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears. She began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving under the ivory silk. "Please," Rebecca shrieked, her voice a perfect imitation of Sarah's own pitch. "Please don't let her hurt me again. She's crazy. She just kept screaming that she was me." Sarah stared in horror. "What? No, I'm Sarah. She's Rebecca Thorne." The second officer, a man with a weary face and deep bags under his eyes, Officer Wright, stepped forward. He looked at the woman on the floor, draped in a blood-stained wedding dress, looking like a shattered bride. Then he looked at Sarah, covered in dirt, her hair a wild nest, her eyes bloodshot and manic, pinned to the floor in a dark room. "Ma'am," Wright said to Rebecca, his voice softening. "Are you Sarah Miller?" "Yes," Rebecca sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand. "I live here. I have my ID and my purse on the nightstand. She broke in through the kitchen. She had a knife. She said she was going to take my life because I didn't deserve it." The first officer, a younger woman named Garcia, moved to the nightstand. She picked up a slim leather wallet and flipped it open. She held up a driver's license. The photo was of Sarah Miller, or rather, a woman who looked enough like Sarah in the dim light to pass. "License matches," Garcia said, her voice flat. And we have the 911 call from 10 minutes ago. Caller identified herself as Sarah Miller, reporting a violent home invasion by a former friend named Rebecca. No, Sarah whispered, the word a ghost in her throat. That's not... She's lying. Look at me. Look at my face. We are looking, Wright said, his voice hardening as he stepped toward Sarah. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic snick of the ratchets sounded like a death knell. Sorry, he mumbled to the cuffs as he grabbed Sarah's good arm and twisted it behind her back. Wait! Sarah screamed as the cold metal bit into her skin. Check the signatures. Check the closets. She's an imposter. Save it for the station, Wright grunted. He hauled Sarah to her feet. The world tilted, the pain in her wrist blooming into a white-hot sun. As they dragged her toward the door, Sarah looked back. Rebecca was sitting up, draped in the white silk, a police officer wrapping a navy blue blanket around her shoulders. Rebecca caught Sarah's eye. The tears were still there, but behind them, in the depths of her pupils, was a cold, shimmering triumph. Sarah was being taken away from her own home, in her own clothes, while the thief was being comforted in her own bed. The subversion was complete. The system didn't see the truth. It saw the most convincing performance. The officers marched Sarah down the stairs, her feet dragging on the steps she had polished just last week. Every groan of the wood felt like the house itself was disowning her. They reached the foyer, where the locksmith stood nursing his arm, nodding grimly as Sarah passed. Watch the step, Officer Wright muttered, pushing Sarah toward the front door. Rebecca appeared at the top of the landing, the blanket clutched around her. She leaned over the railing, her face shadowed. It's okay, Mousie, Rebecca whispered, the voice so low only Sarah could hear it. The records will show you were never here. Mousie. The word hit Sarah like an electric shock. It was her father's nickname for her, a secret name he only used when they were alone in his workshop, a name she had never told anyone. Not David, not her mother. Sarah froze. She looked up at the woman in the wedding dress. Rebecca was wearing a pair of elegant pearl drop earrings, Sarah's lucky earrings. Wait. Sarah's mind, trained for years to spot the smallest inconsistency in a brand's narrative, suddenly locked onto a detail. Those weren't just pearls. They were the voice link prototypes her firm had been testing for high-level executive dictation. They looked like jewelry, but they were high-fidelity recording devices, triggered by specific vocal frequencies. Sarah had forgotten she was wearing them when she came home. Rebecca must have taken them from the jewelry box while Sarah was in the kitchen. Garcia! Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. The earrings! Look at her earrings! Shut up! Wright growled, shoving her toward the patrol car. They're recorders! Sarah screamed, digging her heels into the gravel of the driveway. Voice command. Archive playback. Command. Archive playback. The air in the driveway seemed to freeze. From the top of the stairs, a tiny, crystal-clear voice began to emanate from the pearls in Rebecca's ears. It was amplified by the acoustics of the vaulted foyer. Fits like a second skin. Much better balanced now, don't you think? The officer stopped. Rebecca's hand flew to her ears, her face turning a ghostly shade of white. The recording continued, the sound of the X-Acto knife slashing through the air, the thud of Sarah hitting the marble table. I am going to actually use your life, Sarah. You just archive it. I've earned this. I've spent months becoming you while you were busy counting your little compliments. Officer Garcia turned, her hand moving to her holster. She looked up at the woman on the landing. The victim was now frantically clawing at her own ears, trying to rip the jewelry off. But the voice-activated lock had engaged. Move the money to the Caymans. Use the Lily's passkey. Once she's dead or in a psych ward, the house is mine. David is already gone. It's perfect. The silence that followed the recording was absolute. Even the crickets in the Connecticut woods seemed to hold their breath. Officer Wright looked at the handcuffs on Sarah's wrists, then up at the woman in the wedding dress. He didn't say sorry this time. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we have a code 4. Suspect in custody, the other one. And call for an ambulance. We have a victim with a compound fracture." The descent from the landing was not graceful. Rebecca didn't fight as Garcia led her down the stairs. She seemed to have deflated, the ivory silk now looking like a shroud. As she passed Sarah in the driveway, Rebecca didn't look at her. She stared at the gravel, her knuckles cracking in that same rhythmic sequence. Pop, 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 pop. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, as the officers shoved Rebecca into the back of the second patrol car. "She's a pro, honey," Wright said, his voice weary as he unlocked Sarah's cuffs. "We just got a hit on the prints Garcia took from the Glass Award. Rebecca Thorne, alias Elena Vance, alias Sarah Jenkins. She's done this in Illinois and Oregon. She finds women with no family, high assets, and low self-esteem. She doesn't just rob them. She replaces them." Sarah sat on the bumper of the ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The paramedics were working on her wrist, but she couldn't feel the pain. She watched the red and blue lights strobe against the white siding of her house. The house was hers again. The bank account would be frozen and restored. David would come back from the hotel, his sweaters would return to the closet, and the Sarah Miller on the driver's license would once again refer to the woman sitting in the driveway. But as Sarah looked at her reflection in the darkened window of the ambulance, she didn't see the senior partner. She didn't see the woman who kept a notebook of compliments to prove she existed. She saw a woman whose life had been unstitched in a single afternoon. The perfect life, the secure identity. It was all just lace and silk, easily torn, easily replaced. Months later, the neighborhood returned to its manicured silence. The smart locks were gone, replaced by heavy iron bolts that Sarah checked 3 times every night. David was in the living room, the sound of his right-turn-only GPS murmuring from his phone as he planned his route to work. Sarah stood in front of the hallway mirror. She had a new haircut, a different color. She didn't keep the notebook anymore. The pages had been burned in the fireplace. She reached out and touched the glass, her fingers tracing the line of her own jaw. She was Sarah Miller. The state said so. The bank said so. Her husband said so. But as she stared into her own eyes, she felt a cold, hollow space where her certainty used to be. She had her name back, but the woman who had owned it before the afternoon of the lilies was gone. She was a survivor, yes. But she was also a stranger, living in a house that had once belonged to someone else. In the silence of the suburban night, she could still hear the faint, ghostly sound of scissors snip-snip snipping away at the edges of her world.